Wyoming Territory, June 1879. The wind howled over the Medicine Bow Range as Wyatt Harlan pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of a narrow ridge, squinting down at the scorched remains of a homestead below. Smoke still rose from the blackened cabin. Not fresh, maybe a day or two old, but not cold either. He dismounted with a grunt, wide-brimmed hat shading sharp eyes as he made his way down the slope with cautious steps. His rifle was slung across his shoulder, though his hand rested near the grip as he approached the ruins. The barn had collapsed, half-burned. A chicken coop sat empty. No animals, no movement. But as he rounded the corner of the house, he heard it a faint rustle. Then a voice, low and hoarse. "Do not come closer." He paused, eyes narrowing. A woman stood against the far wall, a battered shotgun clutched in shaking hands. Her dress was torn at the hem, soaked from the knees down. Her face was smeared with ash, but her eyes were sharp, fierce. "I am not here to hurt you," Wyatt said, keeping his voice even. "Name is Wyatt Harlan. I saw the smoke." She did not lower the shotgun, but her grip faltered. "You are too late," she said, voice cracking. "They already took everything." He looked past her into the broken shell of the house. Blood on the floor. The back door ripped off its hinges. Who did this? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowly lowered the gun and leaned it against the wall. Her shoulders sagged under invisible weight. "Outlaws. 3 of them. Came 2 nights ago. I sent my boys to hide, but they found them." Wyatt's stomach twisted. "Your boys?" She nodded once. "Wesley is 6. Warren just turned 4. Where are they now?" "Gone." The word hit like a gunshot. Her voice cracked on it, but she did not cry. She just stood there, arms limp, as if her body had nothing left to give. Wyatt stepped forward. "What is your name?" "Zadie Zimmerman." She said it like it did not matter anymore. Wyatt looked into her eyes. "We will find them." Zadie shook her head. "You do not owe me anything. I do not want your money." Wyatt stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Then I will give you my life instead." She blinked hard. "You do not even know me." "I know enough. You are standing here alive when most would not be." "That counts." Zadie looked away, jaw clenched. Her lips trembled for a moment before she pressed them shut. "They rode west," she said after a pause. "One had a red band on his arm. They took the boys in a wagon. I tried to follow, but—" Her legs buckled then. Wyatt caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her gently to sit on the porch's edge. She looked light, but her body was stiff with exhaustion. "I have not eaten since it happened," she muttered. Wyatt reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a strip of jerky and a canteen. She hesitated, but took them. He watched her eat, slow and mechanical. "I buried my husband 2 months ago," she said quietly. "Fever took him. We were trying to start over here. It was supposed to be safe." Wyatt sat beside her, letting the silence stretch between them. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light over the broken land. "This wagon any markings on it?" he asked. She nodded. "A green canvas, torn on the left side." He stood. "Then I can track it." Zadie looked up at him. "Why would you do this? You do not even know my boys." "Because they are children. And because you are alone." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "I cannot stay here." "No," he agreed. "You are coming with me." She looked down at her dirt-streaked hands. "I have nothing left." "You have me," he said, then helped her to her feet. By sundown, they had packed what little remained: some blankets, a carving knife, a small wooden horse Wesley had made, and set off westward. Zadie rode behind Wyatt on his horse, arms wrapped loosely around his waist, her head resting against his back. She did not speak much, but he could feel the tension in her body, the way she jolted at every sound, the way her hands twitched when they passed a dark patch of trees. They rode until stars filled the sky. Wyatt set up camp in a clearing near a river bend, the fire flickering low. Zadie sat across from him, her knees drawn to her chest. "My boys," she said suddenly. "They're good boys. Wesley likes to read. Warren, he is always laughing. Always. We will get them back." She looked at him across the fire, eyes raw. "You really believe that?" "I do." Then, for the first time, her face softened. Just a little. She nodded and lay down on the blanket he had spread for her, curling on her side. Wyatt watched her for a moment, then turned to the fire, gaze steady. He had not meant to find anything out here but cattle and silence. But now there was a woman with ash in her hair and fire in her heart, and 2 boys who needed saving. And he would give everything he had to see them safe in her arms again. By morning, the sky was a pale stretch of blue, cloudless and wide. Wyatt doused the fire with a careful pour from the canteen and packed his rifle into the saddle scabbard. Zadie stood nearby, silent but alert, her eyes on the trail that cut west into the trees. She wore a man's old coat now, one Wyatt had pulled from his bedroll frayed at the cuffs but warm. Her hair was plaited back tightly, a few ash-colored strands escaping the braid. "Tracks will be clearer once we get past the shale," Wyatt said, adjusting the cinch on the saddle. Zadie nodded, stepping up beside the horse. "I'll walk. You'll ride. We make better time that way." She tilted her head. "You think I'm slowing you down? I think you've walked enough." She stared at him a moment, then climbed up without another word. Wyatt followed, taking the lead as they pushed through the pine-shadowed slope. The ground sloped gently upward, the soil turning soft and dark where a creek had run over in spring. They found the wagon's trail not long after a set of deep ruts veering west by northwest, the left side dragging slightly, as if the axle had been damaged. Zadie leaned to see them better. "You think they're headed toward Rollins? Maybe. Or further. Could be they're skirting the settlements. Some of those canyons past Elk Mountain hold outlaws like bark holds sap." She glanced toward the horizon, where the slope met sky. "How much ground can we cover today? Depends how long they stop. If they've got the boys, they won't move fast." Zadie's hands tightened at her sides, but she said nothing. They rode on. By early afternoon, the sun had turned sharp, and Wyatt called a halt beside a shallow stream scattered with willow scrub. Zadie crouched by the water, cupping it into her mouth, her knees muddy. Wyatt unsaddled the horse and let it drink, then sat beneath a cottonwood, watching her from under the brim of his hat. "You always ride alone?" she asked, not looking up. "Most times. You ever lose anyone?" He watched the water sparkle against her dirt-streaked fingers, then answered, "A brother. In Missouri. Before Appomattox." She turned her head. "What was his name?" "James. He was younger. Thought dying in a uniform would make him a man. I told him not to go. But he did." "Yeah." She stood slowly, brushing grit from her skirt. "I kept thinking I'd hear them calling. Every time the wind moved the grass outside, I'd get up. Couldn't help myself." Wyatt nodded once, then stood and tightened the saddle. "Come on. We'll ride till dusk." They crossed into a narrow pass by late day, where the rocks closed in tight and the shadows grew long. Wyatt slowed the horse, eyes scanning the brush. A broken tin cup lay half buried in dust near a stand of cedar. Zadie spotted it too. Wesley carried one like that. Used it for wild berries. Wyatt dismounted and checked the dirt nearby. One of them was here. Last night or early this morning. Still ahead of us. He stood and met her eyes. Not far now. She looked down at the tin cup, lifting it gently, then tucked it into the inside pocket of her coat. Warren used to steal berries from him and run off laughing. I told him someday he'd trip over a root and learn his lesson. Wyatt didn't speak. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke again, old, but not far off. He motioned for her to remount, and they followed the trail through the narrowing gorge. When they made camp that evening, the land opened into a small basin, ringed by wind-worn boulders and low scrub. Wyatt gathered dry branches from the edge of the basin, while Zadie laid out the bedrolls. Her hands moved slower than the night before, steadier. "You came here looking for cattle?" she asked as he struck flint to steel. "Strays from a herd I helped winter near the Platte. Thought maybe a few wandered south. And instead you found me." Wyatt lit the fire, the sparks catching low and steady. "Weren't expecting to find anything. But I'm not sorry I did." Zadie sat cross-legged, watching the flames climb. "It's strange. I should feel hollow. But I don't." He glanced toward her. "Not anymore?" She shook her head. "Not right now." They ate in quiet salt pork warmed over the coals, a heel of bread split between them. When the stars came out, Zadie lay back on the blanket, her eyes fixed upward. "Do you ever think about settling?" she asked. "Somewhere quiet." Wyatt leaned back on his elbows. "Thought about it. Never found the right piece of land. Maybe you were looking in the wrong places." He turned his head toward her. "Maybe I was." She didn't look at him, but her voice softened. "I don't know where this road ends. But I want to be the one who finds them." I want them to see me first. They will. She reached for the tin cup, still tucked in her coat, and held it against her chest like a keepsake. The night settled deep and still, and they lay beside the fire, not touching, but close enough to hear each other breathe. The sky stretched wide above them, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and juniper. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. The next morning broke slow, with dew clinging to the grass and a hush over the land that felt almost reverent. Wyatt rose first, easing from his blanket without waking Zadie. He gathered wood from the line of scrub oaks to the east and built a small fire with practiced hands. The smell of burning mesquite drifted through the still air, sharp and clean. Zadie stirred when he dropped a pan of water over the flames. She sat up slowly, blinking against the pale light. Her braid had loosened in the night, strands curling along her jaw. She didn't speak right away, just pulled her coat around her and watched the fire. Wyatt handed her a strip of dried venison from his saddlebag. "Where'd you get this?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. "Traded for it near Red Cloud Agency last spring." He settled on the opposite side of the fire, stretching his legs. Trapper with a busted foot. Had more meat than he knew what to do with. She chewed thoughtfully. "You always carry food for men you might never meet again. I carry what I can spare. Never know who's going to need it." Zadie looked at him then, her eyes searching. "That how you were raised?" He nodded. "My mother kept a ledger of every borrowed cup of sugar and every returned favor. Said kindness was a form of accounting. Even if you never got paid back, you kept your own balance." Zadie warmed her hands near the fire, her fingers red from cold. "My father kept ledgers too, but his were full of debts no one could repay." Wyatt didn't ask what kind of debts. Her voice was too flat for that to be a place he was welcome yet. They put out the fire before the sun cleared the ridge. Dust clung to their boots as they climbed the rise above the basin. Beyond it, the land flattened into prairie again, a wide stretch of buffalo grass broken by soapweed and threadbare cottonwoods. In the distance, a pair of magpies lifted off from something half hidden in the grass. Wyatt motioned for Zadie to stay back. He approached slowly, rifle in hand. A mule lay collapsed near the edge of the trail, its flank torn by something sharp. The wagon it had pulled was gone. "Fresh," he called over his shoulder. "Flies haven't touched it yet. They're nearby." Zadie came up beside him, eyes scanning the horizon. "Could be they cut it loose," Wyatt said. Mule was slowing them down. She crouched and touched the blood-crusted harness. "Wesley used to feed ours carrots, even when I told him not to waste food." The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of wood smoke. Wyatt turned his head, nostrils flaring. "Camp," he said. "Close." They left the horse tied low in a ravine and climbed the next rise on foot. The grass grew thicker there, hiding their approach. At the top, Wyatt pulled Zadie down beside him, flattening them against the ridge. Below, in a hollow scrubbed by wind, sat a crude camp. 3 bedrolls, scattered gear, a fire smoldering low. The green canvas wagon was tucked half behind a thicket, the left side torn as she'd described. 2 men sat by the fire, both armed. The third paced near the wagon, muttering. And near the back, bound to a tree, were 2 boys. Zadie gasped, a sound she barely managed to swallow. Wyatt grabbed her wrist, firm but gentle. "They're alive," he whispered. "That's what matters." Zadie's eyes shimmered, but she nodded. "Can you shoot?" he asked. She looked at him, not insulted, just weighing. "I can hit what I need to." "Good. We wait for dusk. They're careless. We use that." She nodded again, lips pressed tight. They withdrew below the ridge and spent the afternoon in silence. Wyatt cleaned his rifle while Zadie gathered a few smooth stones, weighing them in her palm. Her hands didn't shake. When he glanced at her, she was staring into the dirt like she could see the hours passing beneath it. As the sun dipped low, they circled wide until they came around behind the camp, hidden by a spur of rock. Wyatt went first, slipping through the brush like he'd done it 100 times. Zadie followed, low and quiet. When they reached the edge of the hollow, Wyatt pointed to the pacing man. "I'll take him. You wait for my mark." Then the fire. She nodded once, eyes fixed on the boys. Wyatt crept forward, using the slope to mask his approach. The man muttering near the wagon didn't hear him until it was too late. Wyatt struck hard with the butt of the rifle. The body dropped in the dirt without a sound. Zadie stood then, throwing one of her stones. It hit the fire's edge, scattering embers. One of the men rose, distracted, and Wyatt took him down with a clean shot to the shoulder. The last man turned, gun half raised, but Zadie already had her shotgun aimed. She fired once. The man crumpled. Wyatt ran to the boys. Wesley blinked up at him, face streaked with grime but alert. Warren whimpered once, then quieted when he saw Zadie. "Mama." She dropped to her knees, cutting their bindings with Wyatt's knife. "It's me, baby." Her voice cracked. "It's really me." Warren launched into her arms. Wesley followed, burying his face against her side. She held them both like she'd never let go again. Wyatt stood back, watching the three of them. Zadie looked up at him, her face lit with something more than relief. Something rooted deeper. He knelt beside them, hands still bloody. "You kept your word," she said. "I meant it." She looked at him, her mouth trembling just faintly. "You said you'd give your life." "I still will," he said. "If that's what it takes to stay beside you." Zadie looked down at her sons, then back at Wyatt. "I don't want your life either." He watched her, waiting. "I want your days. And your nights. I want you to stay." Wyatt reached out, brushing a streak of dirt from Warren's cheek. "Then that's what I'll give." The fire behind them burned low, casting long shadows across the hollow. Zadie leaned into him, her boys curled between them, and the wind carried only the sound of breathing and the hush of grass as it bent toward night. They buried the bodies at sunrise, far off the trail between two ridges where the wind wouldn't uncover them. Wyatt carried the shovel. Zadie kept the boys close, one hand resting on Wesley's shoulder, the other holding Warren's wrist. Neither child cried. They watched the dirt fall with dry, solemn eyes, as though some part of them had aged beyond their years in the span of a single night. Afterward, Wyatt hauled what little was salvageable from the camp: 2 canteens, a coil of rope, a sack of flour with a mouse hole near the bottom. The wagon was too damaged to take far, so he stripped the canvas, folded it tight, and tied it behind his saddle. Zadie sat on a flat rock near the fire pit, helping Wesley thread a strip of leather through a cracked button on his shirt. Warren clutched a pine cone and leaned against her leg. Wyatt watched them for a moment, then knelt to check the boy's ankle where a red welt showed beneath the cuff of his trousers. "He limping?" Wyatt asked. "Only when it's cold," Zadie replied. "It's not broken. Likely sprained. I'll carry him a while." Warren looked up. "I can ride." Wyatt met his gaze. "You can. But I'll carry you just the same." The boy didn't argue, just nodded and leaned against his mother again. They set off south, where the land sloped gently and the grass grew in long, silver-edged waves. Wyatt chose the route not for speed, but for shelter, low country with water and shade. The boys rode double on the horse, wrapped in Wyatt's old coat and one of the trader's blankets. Zadie walked beside them, her boots caked in dust that cracked with every step. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that she spoke again. "What will you do now?" Wyatt adjusted the saddlebag. "Hadn't thought further than this. You could have left once they were safe." "I could have." She walked a few more paces before saying, "Did you really mean it? What you said, about giving your life?" He didn't look at her. "I don't say things I don't mean. I've known men who did. I'm not them." A silence stretched, broken only by the soft creak of saddle leather and the wind through the cottonwoods. Then Wesley called back, "Mama, I'm hungry." Zadie opened the cloth sack she'd tied at her waist and passed him a piece of dried apple. Warren reached for it too, and she tore it in half without comment. Wyatt glanced at her. "We'll stop before the ridge. There's a spring there, and enough cover for a fire." She nodded. When they reached the hollow near dusk, Wyatt lifted Warren down and carried him to a patch of moss beneath a leaning pine. The boy was asleep before Wyatt even settled him against the saddlebag. Zadie knelt beside Wesley, wiping his face with a damp cloth, her fingers gentle but efficient. Wyatt set about building the fire, his hands finding rhythm in the task. Sparks caught quickly, and soon the warmth reached out over the clearing. Once the boys were fed and laid beneath the blankets, Zadie drew her knees up and sat beside Wyatt. The quiet between them was easy now, no longer heavy with grief or guardedness. "I never thought I'd be sitting like this again," she said, eyes fixed on the flames. "Not beside anyone. I didn't think I'd be the one sitting with you," Wyatt said. "But I'm glad I am." She turned to him slowly. "You're not afraid of what comes after this?" "Of course I am. But fear doesn't turn me away." It tells me what matters. Her voice dropped. And what matters? You. Them. Whatever we make of what's left. She studied him, her expression unreadable in the firelight. I've been alone a long time, she said. Even when I wasn't. You're not alone now. She reached for his hand, her grip sure. Don't promise me forever unless you mean to deliver it. I don't make promises I can't keep. She held his gaze a moment longer, then leaned into his side and let her head rest lightly against his shoulder. He didn't move, just let her settle there, the weight of her against him grounding and real. The fire crackled. The boys breathed slow and deep beside them. Overhead, the stars blinked into place one by one. Zadie closed her eyes. Feels like we're building something. We are, Wyatt said, and I'm staying to see it through. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. The night held them quietly, as if the world had paused just long enough for two people to begin again. The wind shifted by morning, carrying a scent of sage and damp stone from the canyon mouth. Wyatt stood knee-deep in the cold stream, sleeves rolled high and trousers soaked to the thigh, pulling trout from the shallows with a looped line he'd fixed out of twine and a willow branch. He worked quietly, casting his eyes upstream each time the water stirred differently, until he had 4 fat fish laid on a flat stone. Behind him, Zadie was kneeling in the grass with the boys, showing them how to strip the husks from cattail shoots. Wesley's fingers were stained green to the knuckles, and Warren had a cattail crown perched askew on his head. They looked like they belonged to this land now sun-browned and sturdy, their voices rising with laughter as they tried to mimic their mother's way with the knife. You're wasting half the shoot, Zadie said to Wesley without looking up. I'm not. Just talking more off so it's easier to chew. That logic won't hold when you're hungry this evening. Wyatt returned with the fish strung on a forked branch. I've seen men gut less than that and call it supper. Zadie rose and dusted her skirt. You've also seen men eat pine bark when the snow held too long. I have. Still don't mean I'll be serving it. They dried the fish over a low fire, Wyatt turning them as the skin bubbled and crisped. Zadie packed the cattail roots into a pot with a little salt, and when the boys began to nod off against each other's shoulders, she laid them under the same blanket and tucked the knife beneath her boot. Wyatt sat beside her, watching the fire burn down to orange coals. You told me once your husband was taken by fever. What was his name? Jonas. He was a schoolteacher back in Illinois. Thought we'd find cleaner air out here. She paused. He was kind. Gentle in ways that made a person feel safe. But he never took to the land. Couldn't read it the way some can. Wyatt nodded slowly. Not everyone's meant for it. I thought I wasn't either. Until I had to be. Her voice was steady. I never expected this place to give me anything back. It did, he said. She looked at him. It gave me you. They didn't speak again until the fire burned low enough to sleep beside. Wyatt spread his blanket closer than usual and lay beside her, his hand resting lightly over hers where it curled near her ribs. The next days passed in rhythm. Wyatt traded the mule carcass for a weathered cart and a pair of sturdy oxen from a drifter near the pass. The man had no use for them too slow, he said, and bound for Cheyenne alone. Wyatt offered one of the trader's knives and a coil of rope in exchange, and they drove the cart south toward the Little Laramie. Zadie began to write again, nothing long, just notes in a small ledger Wyatt discovered among her salvaged things. She didn't show him what she wrote, but he saw the way her shoulders eased each time she closed the book. At night, she told the boys stories that Wyatt had never heard, tales of a fox who borrowed fire from the stars, of a farmer who built a house on stilts to chase the sun. Wesley would ask questions in a half-sleeping mumble, and Warren would nestle deeper into her side before sleep took him completely. One evening, as they camped beneath a stand of quaking aspen, Wyatt passed her a folded scrap of paper. It was a land deed 30 acres east of Elk Mountain, not far from the river. Zadie unfolded it slowly. You bought land. I did. What for? For a house. A garden. Maybe a barn, if we're lucky. She stared at the paper, then up at him. You want me there? I want us there. If you'll have it. Zadie looked past him to the boys, then back to Wyatt. I've had pieces of safety before, but never all at once. This feels like all of it. It can be. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. Then yes, I'll have it. They moved onto the land before the first frost. Wyatt built the walls with timber traded from a sawyer downriver. Zadie planted rows of beans and squash, and taught Wesley how to mark the soil for spacing. Warren followed her with a tin pail, dropping seeds in crooked lines, his giggle rising each time the chickens chased a beetle from the furrows. They built shelves inside the cabin for her books, and a cradle for the neighbor's new baby when she came calling one morning with a loaf of bread and a bundle of wool for mending. The boys made friends with a Lakota boy whose family passed through each fall, and by winter, Wesley could speak enough of the language to teach Wyatt the words for snow, for tree, for home. One night, after the boys had gone to sleep, Wyatt stood by the hearth, watching the fire throw shadows across the small space they now called theirs. "You ever think it'd feel like this?" he asked. Zadie came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I didn't think I'd live long enough to find out." He turned in her arms, brushing hair from her face. "I'm glad you did. So am I." He kissed her slow, the way he'd learned she liked, quiet, steady, with both hands framing her face like it was something precious. She leaned into him, her breath hitching just slightly when he rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me this is real," she whispered. "It's as real as the land under us." They fell asleep that night with the fire burning low and the wind whispering through the chinks in the logs, wrapped in each other like they were still learning how to share warmth. By spring, the boys had carved their names into the barn door, and Zadie had written her first full story since before Jonas died. It wasn't about loss. It was about a woman who found the road back to herself through dust and ash and the quiet company of a man who never once asked her to be anything but what she already was. And every morning, when Wyatt rose and found her curled beside him, soft with sleep and safe, he thanked whatever quiet mercy had led him west of where he thought his life ended because it had only just begun.